Hey there, Sally Lawrence here. Just want to give you a brief overview of what your buyer representation agreement includes. Of course, I'm going to encourage you to read every word because there's a lot of really great information in here, but there is a lot of information. So I want to make sure you've got an idea of what it is that you're looking at. So first of all, when you click on the link for in your email to go to DocuSign, you'll see this pop up at the top. Please review and act on these documents. We've got a separate video that shows you exactly how the DocuSign process works for you, but you'll know that you're in the right place where you see this picture of me and the logo for the company, both present. And then the first thing I'm going to do is just click continue here. Now, one of the things that's important to know about DocuSign is that if you hit this button that says start, it's just going to take you from one place to the next to go ahead and put your signatures in. But in order to be able to review your documents, I really recommend that you scroll through them first so that you can see what's there. Over here on the right, we've got the thumbnails view, so you can move through page by page. And this very first one that we start with is the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship. This establishes what our relationship is from a fiduciary responsibility. And there's a whole separate video on that if you want to get more detail about it. Also, you'll notice that this is showing tags for me to sign. I will be the first one to sign, and then your tags will appear here in the buyer's area when it's time for you to sign. Second page is just the civil code that explains all of the requirements for the agency declaration. And we have a new document just this year that just came out in October for the Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory. Obviously, we're not going to do any discrimination on race, color, ancestry, national origin, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender, gender identity, gender expression, marital status, familial status, source of incomes, disability, whether mental or physical, medical conditions, citizenship, primary languages, immigration status, military or veteran status, age, criminal history, and any arbitrary characteristics. So the whole thing is, these are all protected classes. What it comes down to is do the right thing, always do the right thing. And just to let you know, that's the way we do business. But that has become a part of all of our transactions now. So then we get to the buyer representation agreement. And the first thing to notice here is that it's starting on a certain date, and then it ends at the end of the month in the following year. We'll get to why, what you can do about that if you want to make a change in just a moment. But in the meantime, we write all of our contracts that way because we are, quite frankly, pretty busy. And letting contracts expire means that we've got to stop and do this all over again. One of the things that's important when we're doing a buyer representation agreement about like this is that we have a recommendation for the areas that we're looking in. So we're looking within Kern County or northern Los Angeles County, known as the Antelope Valley. In order to be a valid contract, we also have to list a price range. So the standard is $50,000 at the low end, up to $500,000 at the high end. Now, if that's not your price range, we get it. We understand what price range you really want. This is just boilerplate to be able to establish the relationship that lets me represent you most effectively. So again, here it talks about agency relationships. Could be a single agency only, but I really recommend not doing that because it limits the things that are available for you. The next thing that's required in order to be a valid contract is compensation. So this paragraph talks about compensation, and it specifies that I will be paid 3% compensation. So let's talk about that for a minute. Couple of things around that. So first of all, 9 times out of 10, this will never be something that comes up for you. The listing agent on a property has established with the seller what compensation they are offering to the buyer's agent. And most of the time that's adequate. Sometimes it's not 3%, depending on the circumstances. Most of the time it's just not that big a deal. I'm not that money motivated. But there are a couple of circumstances where you could wind up having to kick in for some of my compensation. Let me give you a couple of examples of when that could happen. Let's say, for example, that the perfect property that we find for you happens to be an auction property. And typically auctions are only offering 1% to the selling agent. And I think you can understand that that's really just not enough to be able to do the competent job that you need me to do for you. So that's one example. Another example might be a short sale. Same thing, compensation is often reduced under those circumstances. And then the other one that could pop up is we might find a for sale by owner. Now, I know that you know that most of the time, the reason people want to do for sale by owner is that they don't want to pay compensation to a broker. So good news and bad news around that. Most of the time I have been successful in having the seller actually pay my compensation. And we can do that by requesting that they pay a certain amount of percentage towards your closing costs. And because of this contract, your closing costs can very easily include my compensation. And if there is a circumstance where you would end up having to contribute to my compensation, you will know that before we fully execute a contract. So you'll see what those numbers really look like for you. And then again, if for some reason we don't find the right house for you, and I have given you a list within 5 days of all of the properties that we've seen, within 180 days of the time that our contract ends, if you purchase any of those properties, you actually do still owe me a commission for those properties. So we've got timing of compensation, internet advertising. This really doesn't apply much in terms of buyer representation agreement. This section talks about my obligations and the authorizations. And then this section talks about my scope of duty. This section talks about your duty, which basically is, you're going to be kind of on top of things so that we can make sure we get you the outcome that you're looking for. We've got some other terms and conditions. There are a number of additional documents that are included as part of this package for you, which is why the package is so big. One of those is the buyer inspection advisory. There's also a statewide buyer and seller advisory. And that one has I think it's up to 14 pages now, of each paragraph kind of describing things that you may want to investigate. So I highly recommend that you scan through that pretty carefully. It will help to inform you when we finally get to the house that might be the right house, if there's some inspection that you may not have even been aware that you might actually want to do. The next one is the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. And that means that it is possible that I could wind up representing both you as the buyer and a seller for if that's the right property for you. And then we have another one, the BHAA is short for the Buyer Homeowners Association Advisory. We really only have a couple of homeowners associations that we ever deal with, and that may or may not be applicable to your situation, but just in case, it is worth checking out. And then the last one is the Wildfire Disaster Advisory. Because of all of the wildfires in California, a number of different things have happened. And one of the most important ones is that there are certain areas where obtaining homeowners insurance may be very difficult or very expensive because of the wildfires. So we want to make sure that we're considering that in our entire thought process as we're looking for the right house for you. And of course, this is a contract, so everything is in writing. That's the entire agreement. Dispute resolution will be by mediation. That's the way we always do it first. So then we've got the buyer inspection advisory here. And I know I'm going through this really quick. I just want to give you an idea of what's included. We're also required to share with you the California Consumer Privacy Act advisory, but know that I will always keep your information confidential. This is the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, and it says that I could be representing multiple buyers or multiple sellers, and in fact could have dual agency in any of those cases. Then here's the addendum that I really want to bring attention to. Back at the beginning of this, when I said we write all of our agreements for a 1-year period, that I feel comfortable doing that because I also include an easy exit guarantee, which says very simply, all parties understand and agree that either the principals, that's you, or the agent, that's me, may cancel this agreement at any time, provided the canceling party has given the other party a week to correct any issue of which they've been made aware. That's the most fair way I can think of to do this. Honestly, I don't think I've ever had anybody invoke that easy exit guarantee, but it's there because I want you to feel comfortable. This one is the market conditions advisory. And the most important thing in this, as far as I'm concerned, is that real estate markets are cyclical and they can change over time. We can't predict what the future market conditions are going to be with any kind of accuracy. And ultimately, although I will be happy to counsel you about purchase price, the offer price that we put in on any house is going to be your choice. It's going to be what you decide to do. I'm not going to tell you what you can or can't do. I'll just give you advice around what may be beneficial based on what we know about that property and current circumstances. Oh, it's also important to know that most residential purchasing agreements contain some number of contingencies. I highly suggest that we never make a non-contingent offer. Well, almost never make a non-contingent offer. We can talk about that in more detail as we move forward. We may also be dealing with multiple offers, especially in a tight market. Then we've got the statewide buyer and seller advisory. I'll just give you a couple of examples here. It'll give you examples here of the paragraphs that cover like investigation of physical conditions, property use and ownership. So what paragraphs and pages you should be looking at for those specific things. Some of the things that might come up. Let's see if I can find one of my favorites here. Well, let's talk about this. Square footage, lot size, boundaries, and surveys. Whatever information is provided by the listing agent and by the seller may or may not be accurate. So let's say, for example, the square footage shows as 1,800 square feet. When you get the property appraised, the appraiser will most often measure the properties so we get an actual measured square footage, and they could be very different. Now, one of the things to think about is, let's say that, you know, it's reported as 1,800 square feet, but it's really only 1,400 square feet. Keep in mind that you're purchasing the property based on the way it felt to you. Okay, so there are lots and lots of things in here that you really do want to kind of look through. This part talks about the California Fair Plan and how certain properties can only get homeowners fire insurance through the California Fair Plan, but we will know that during the course of escrow if we wind up in that situation. So all of these things that you can check out, lots and lots of different types of investigations that you can do. And it's really good to know what those are. And yes, I know I'm scrolling through really quickly, but there's a lot to cover here. So then the next thing we get are these, it's actually 5 booklets, which are the residential environmental hazards booklets. And it goes through a whole bunch of information there. Next up is the lead-based paint booklet. And again, these are all required by law to be provided, and they're supposed to be provided by the seller, but what we find is that very often the seller doesn't do that. So I always include them as part of our buyer representation agreement so that you will have at least seen them, because most of the time we don't get these until like the very end of the transaction. So I want you to have seen them up front. This is the home energy rating systems booklet. And then we've got the homeowner's guide to earthquake safety. Then we've got the earthquake hazards report, which if we're buying a house that is built before 1960, this report has to be filled out by the homeowner to say what's been braced, you know, what has not been, and so forth. If the house is newer than 1960, it does not need to be included. And then this is the receipt that says you got all of these booklets. So there's all of that. And then finally, we've got the wildfire disaster advisory, as we talked about this already, and the buyer homeowner association advisory. So a lot of information there. I know it's a lot to go through, but this is a great way to get a good head start on your home purchase. As always, let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to talk about it with you in even more detail.